This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room with breaking news on the crisis in Afghanistan. The Pentagon now says evacuation flights are underway, again after a backlog that grounded planes for hours. President Biden is now promising, I'm quoting him now, any American who wants to come home, we will get you home. He says he's making the same commitment to evacuate Afghan allies of the United States. In his most extensive comments yet, the president seemed less defensive as he addressed the danger and the chaos since the Taliban takeover. Tonight, there's new confirmation that Americans in Afghanistan have been beaten by the Taliban. The Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin sharing that information with U.S. lawmakers. CNN crews have also witnessed Taliban violence escalating in the Afghan capital, making a desperate situation worse by the hour. Our correspondents and analysts are standing by covering every angle of this breaking story. First, let's go to Jeremy Diamond over at the White House. Jeremy, the president made very specific promises today about the evacuation.
That's right, Wolf. Speaking 5 days after the Taliban took control of Kabul and ousted that U.S.-backed government, President Biden clearly trying to show that he is getting the situation under control, also showing some more of his trademark empathy, talking about those gut-wrenching images that he has seen of Afghans desperately trying to get out of Afghanistan. And Wolf, the president also committing to not only get every American who wants to get out of Afghanistan out of the country, but also saying that that commitment extends to those Afghans who help the U.S.
Let me be clear. Any American who wants to come home, we will get you home.
Tonight, President Biden vowing to get all Americans out of Afghanistan and extending that commitment to Afghans who've helped the U.S.
Yes, we're making the same commitment. There's no one more important than bringing American citizens out. I acknowledge that. But they're equally important.
The president trying to project command of a situation that spiraled out of control after the Taliban seized the Afghan capital 5 days ago, leading to scenes of desperation.
There's no reason why I should be catching
you. The president revealing that U.S. troops exited the airport perimeter to bring in 169 Americans trapped in the chaos outside the gates.
We've increased.
And tonight, Biden promising U.S. forces will continue to do what's necessary to get Americans out, including the possibility of rescue missions into Taliban-controlled Kabul.
We're considering every opportunity and every means by which we could get folks to the airport.
Even as he acknowledged he doesn't know how many Americans are still in Afghanistan, he projected confidence that the U.S. can complete evacuations by the end of the month, the deadline for U.S. troops to withdraw. But he warned there are still risks.
This evacuation mission is dangerous. It involves risks to our armed forces, and it's being conducted under difficult circumstances. I cannot promise what the final outcome will be, or what it will be, that it will be without risk of loss. But as Commander-in-Chief, I can assure you that I will mobilize every resource necessary.
Biden also facing fresh questions about why he didn't act sooner to bring Americans and Afghans home after diplomats sent a classified cable in mid-July warning a U.S. withdrawal would lead to the collapse of the U.S.-backed government.
I made the decision. The buck stops with me. I took the consensus opinion. The consensus opinion was that, in fact, it would not occur, if it occurred, until later in the year.
The White House says the U.S. has now evacuated about 13,000 people since Saturday, including 5,700 people just yesterday.
But our commander in Kabul has already given the order for outbound flights to resume.
Evacuation flights now resuming after a bottleneck brought the mission to a halt for at least 10 hours today. As for Americans still trying to get to the airport,
we have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport.
Those words contradicting reports and the images on the ground. And Wolf, those words were also contradicted by Secretary Lloyd Austin, who told members of the House during a briefing this afternoon that there are Americans who have been beaten by the Taliban in Kabul, according to multiple sources who have shared that with CNN. I've since spoken with a White House official who said, acknowledged that it's a volatile situation on the ground and acknowledged that there are going to be reports of challenge and chaos at the airport as Americans try to get there. But this official reaffirmed the fact that the U.S. is working to get every American out of the airport and out of the country. Wolf.
All right, Jeremy Diamond at the White House. Thank you. Let's get some more on the U.S. military operation in Afghanistan. We're joined by our Pentagon correspondent, Oren Lieberman. Oren, as evacuation flights now have resumed, there are still a lot of unanswered questions about the planning for this mission.
And planning has been key, of course, and as the Pentagon often says, it is a planning organization, and that raises the question of why did they run out of space at the first country to take evacuees, and that would be Qatar. That left them scrambling to find other countries, and they have found at least a couple. The UAE, Ramstein Air Base will take some, but President Joe Biden said earlier this week there could be up to 80,000, and that leaves a question of, does the Pentagon and the U.S. government have enough space for all of them as more and more are brought out on a daily basis? Outside of Kabul International Airport, chaos reigns. Bursts of heavy gunfire compound the fear and panic as Taliban use riot control agents on hundreds of Afghans waiting outside a closed U.S. military gate. So many desperate to flee what remains of the country they so recently knew. A mother cradles her young child in the oppressive heat. The crowd hands a baby to U.S. Marines who get the infant medical help. There is little relief at night. More gunfire. Afghans forced away from the barrier that separates them from salvation. Inside the guarded walls of the airport, the U.S. military is showing a very different world. There is food, there is water, medical help, but only for those who can get in. A CNN crew in Kabul witnessing the conditions around the airport. Afghans lining up to be processed. Some sleep on the gravel, waiting for their flight. Flights finally resuming after an hours-long pause as the U.S. scrambled to find more countries to accept evacuees. Qatar, the first place to accept fleeing Afghans, had reached its limit. U.S. flights stopped leaving Kabul. But there are still thousands of people at the airport waiting to get out.
They have received night letters through mass text messages from the Taliban. And the Taliban said, we are going to summarily burn you and your families alive.
Former Army Major Peter Quinn worked with Afghan commandos and pilots during deployments to Afghanistan, the elite of the Afghan military. Now he's trying to get them out before they are hunted down.
I love these men, and I owe a debt of moral obligation to them to get them, their wives, and their children out to safety.
The administration saying for the first time U.S. troops went over the wall to rescue 169 Americans nearby.
In a short amount of time, with a short amount of distance, some of our troops were able to go out there and retrieve them and bring them in.
Since the U.S. sent more troops into Kabul to speed up the evacuation, there have been no reported exchanges of fire between the Taliban and U.S. forces. But the Taliban has shown off its new equipment, courtesy of the U.S. government, seized during the collapse of the Afghan military. The U.S. has made its mission clear: get out as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. But for everyone waiting outside the airport trying to board a flight, there are many more who couldn't get this far. The Air Force says it's been able to put more than 400 people on average on each of these C-17 flights. That's more than double what it was just a couple of days ago. Wolf, obviously, if the airport has to shut down operations for the security situation, or because they don't know where to put people, or another reason, that number of people moved per hour drops very quickly.
Certainly does. Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon Force. Thank you. Tonight, CNN's Clearest Award and her crew captured truly remarkable images. Look at these from inside a U.S. evacuation flight as they themselves were going to take off for Doha, Qatar, along with about 400 Afghan nationals who were so desperate to flee their country. Clarissa Ward has been doing amazing reporting for us directly from the scene in Kabul, including the growing desperation at the airport.
I've started the application, but it hasn't been finished yet, and you see them being escorted back out through the very gate that they got crushed in for 7 hours just to get their chance to leave. So if your paperwork isn't in order and you don't have a sponsor with you, it is very tough to get to this stage where you're finally on the airfield and ready to go. Imagine being here with your family for 2 days in the scorching sun, trying to take care of your children, with no sense of what the future will hold, what happens when you get to America. I spoke to one woman who actually got separated from her family. Well, she was inside here, but the rest of her family was stuck outside the base. is no mechanism for dealing with a situation like that. You lose your family, you lost your family. There's no way to reconnect people at this stage. There's no way to bring them in from the front gate. Honestly, there's no way to rescue anyone from the front gate. It's survival of the fittest.
We're also grateful to Clarissa for her truly amazing, very courageous reporting. Let's dig deeper right now to all of this. Our senior commentator, the former Ohio Governor John Kasich, is with us. CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling is joining us. CNN presidential historian Tim Naftali is here, and our White House reporter Natasha Bertrand. Governor Kasich, we're seeing dramatic images from Clarissa Ward. You just saw a truly packed military plane. She describes chaos on the ground in Kabul, people waiting hours and hours and hours in the heat, facing violence from the Taliban. They're simply trying to get to the airport, but President Biden is arguing that the U.S. has this under control. Did you get any reassurance from his remarks today?
Of course not. This is a complete catastrophe, and the ramifications of this, the disruption, the loss of confidence in America, is something that cannot at this point be understated, be overstated, excuse me. I mean, what has happened here is frankly unimaginable. We got a general with us, and he will tell you the planning that they go into, and they didn't have the planning for some reason. I don't understand. And the president said, oh, I was never warned about the fact that this could happen. That's just simply not true. And Wolf, there's a lot of investigations that goes on in Washington, and once this catastrophic situation begins to fade, once we're able to save thousands of people, let me tell you, there needs to be an investigation from top to bottom, and at the end of the day, there are people who have to be held accountable who will lose their jobs. And that is not just in the National Security Council, it could be in the intelligence community, it could be in the State Department. What is happening here, Wolf, it's such a serious matter. And I've been a student of defense and foreign policy. I served on the Defense Committee for 18 years. We investigated things like the blowing up of the Marines in Beirut, but nothing has come close to this. And the mismanagement and the irresponsibility, this just can't pass. We have to save these people, and then we've got to get to the bottom line, and there are people who are going to have to pay the price for this. Because we're talking about humanity, and we're talking about the fact that thank God that you and I and our families weren't over there by some other reason, that we were born over there. Think about the pain and the suffering of these people. And most of it could have been avoided had we planned the right way, and we didn't do it. And if I sound like I'm furious, I am, because my heart bleeds, not just for the Americans, but the Afghans and the children over there and the women who are going to pay such a price for the fact that America didn't handle this right. Joe Biden failed on this. I hope he can get back up on his feet, but he's got a lot of getting up to do, and he needs to not be defiant or arrogant about this, but he needs to be contrite, and I haven't seen enough of it. I supported the guy for President of the United States, and I'm so bitterly disappointed where we are today, and thank you for letting me have a word.
Well, let me let General Hertling have a word as well. General Hertling, how does the messaging that you heard from President Biden actually line up with the reality on the ground?
Well, I don't, first of all, Wolf, I don't quite agree with Governor Kasich. You said earlier the military is a planning organization, but more importantly, it is also an execution organization. And having prepared and partially executed a NEO, a non-combatant evacuation operation like what we're seeing right now, it is the toughest mission the military does. So many challenges that require continuous adaptation to changing circumstances, and to have cameras on board right there showing all the rush of humanity to the Kabul International Airport just only exacerbates. You know, it would be like telling everyone in Washington, D.C. that has a flight out of Reagan National next week to show up tonight. And by the way, even if you don't have a flight, show up. And then trying to support that literal rush of tens of thousands of people that want to get out of the country in a crisis situation. This is an evacuation. Make no mistake about this. I know for a fact that the Pentagon has been planning this for several months. The execution has been unfortunately thwarted by a lot of circumstances, both within the U.S. government and especially within the Afghan government. So it's going to be a contested evacuation. And by the way, unlike Reagan National, the enemy's outside the gate.
Why would you get on the brakes?
It's extremely difficult. I think the military has adapted to a degree under very difficult circumstances.
You're a bitch?
And I think we're going to see an increase in flow in both U.S. citizens and Iraqi SIV recipients as well.
Afghani, recipients of the SIV,
yeah.
Special Immigrant Visas. Tim Naftali, the president, he has really struggled over these days to explain this disaster. He's been angry, defiant. Did he manage, do you believe, to convey a bit more control of the situation during his remarks earlier today?
Well, I think he showed control of the facts that he wanted to share. But if the facts on the ground are not the same as the facts that he shared, then I think it raises questions of transparency and competence. My concern is that he has set a very high bar, and now he has to live up to that bar. And should any American be held hostage or get hurt or, God forbid, be killed in this rescue, his words today will come back to haunt him. Similarly, he made a very important commitment to our Afghan allies. I'm assuming that there is a story behind the story, that our very courageous special forces are helping Afghans get to where they need to be. But we don't know that yet. And I think the numbers that come out will help us understand if the president hit his mark today. He was very confident, but I worry that his words will come back to haunt him just as they did regarding the Taliban's likelihood of success in Kabul.
Natasha, you heard President Biden today dismiss the suggestion that America's closest allies are actually questioning America's credibility right now, but clearly this will have serious repercussions. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, CNN actually reported earlier this week that U.S. allies have said publicly, especially the Secretary General of NATO, Germany's President Angela Merkel, they have said that this was a U.S. decision and that they really had no option here but to follow the U.S. decision. And we also reported that, in terms of losing credibility, well, they have known for quite some time that President Biden felt a deep conviction about this, that he wanted to get out of Afghanistan. And it was discussed during these meetings that he had in Europe with these officials earlier this summer. And they agreed that they came to some kind of consensus about the withdrawal. I think what the foreign allies are now all questioning here is not the overall strategy of withdrawing from Afghanistan, more so how it was carried out, right? So we also reported that Merkel has been kind of grumbling privately to aides that pulling out in this manner and putting this kind of arbitrary deadline on it of August 31st was a domestic political consideration for Joe Biden. That is how Germany feels at the moment. Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, has also said, look, we had no option here but to follow the U.S. political decisions. This was, something that we could not stay there without the United States, basically. And so the one big question, though, is how much of a presence this is going to allow Russia, China, and Pakistan to have in Afghanistan and in the region writ large. That is something that allies are very concerned about as well, because right now, as the U.S. withdraws, as NATO withdraws, that would seem to give an opening to these adversaries of the United States to have a greater presence there.
Governor Kasich, President, hold on a second, Governor. Let me ask you a question you can answer. The president committed today flatly to getting all the Americans out, but how much faith do you put in him to make sure that the Afghan allies who worked with the U.S. military, who worked with the U.S., risked their lives over these many years, how much faith do you have that he will get all of them out as well?
I don't know, Wolf. And listen, I want to be clear about this. There is no way that I am belittling the work of the military in this situation right now. We shouldn't have been in this situation right now. The intelligence community, the military, the Pentagon warned him that the Taliban was going to overrun the Afghan army. They told him that, but he ignored it. And had we planned this thing over time, I favored leaving Afghanistan. It's not the policy, it was the way it was conducted. And had he recognized the fact that this was all going to come tumbling down, they could have sequenced this in a much better way. And now we are where we are. and we have to get out of this, and we've got to save as many people as we can. But it is bordering on almost an impossible situation unless you want to commit more U.S. troops and move away from Kabul. I mean, why did they abandon Bagram Air Force Base? I mean, that was a place where there could have been airlifting people. They didn't plan this right. And so my only point is, look, we got to support the president ultimately. It's about America. I think politics should stop here, and we ought to just go back, see what we did wrong once this is done, and never do this again.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of time to learn the lessons of this disaster, right, and then make sure it never, ever happens again. All right, guys, everybody stand by. There's more developments unfolding right now. Does the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban have national security implications for the United States? We're going to talk about that and more with the former Homeland Security Secretary, Jeh Johnson. He's standing by live. We'll discuss when we come back.
Angie's List is now Angie, your home for everything home. Angie still has the same top pros and reviews you've counted on for more than 20 years. Only now you'll get access to all the tools you need to make your home your happy place. Inside, outside, big or small, Angie helps you find the right solution for whatever you need done, all from your phone. It's simple to find upfront pricing and instantly book hundreds of projects. You can even search pricing guides to see what others paid for similar jobs, and easily compare quotes from top local pros to make sure you're getting a fair price. From lawn care to repairing the AC to the project of your dreams, Angie has your home projects handled from start to finish. Plus, when you book and pay through Angie, they'll cover your project up to the full purchase price, plus limited damage protection with their happiness guarantee. Make your home an Angie home. Check out Angie.com today. And for more on the happiness guarantee, go to Angie.com/happiness-guarantee.htm.
This podcast is supported by First Republic Bank. Now, more than ever, First Republic's priority is serving their clients and communities. Their personalized banking solutions go deeper than a transaction. For over 30 years, First Republic has striven to leave a positive impact on the communities that they serve. From presenting grants to nonprofits in need of going the extra mile, to connecting individuals experiencing hardship with fair loans, the bank is focused on doing the right thing. No matter what your financial goals are, your dedicated First Republic banker will be there to guide you every step of the way. Visit firstrepublic.com today to learn more. That's firstrepublic.com, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
The breaking news tonight, evacuation flights from the Afghan capital resuming after an hours-long pause, during which desperation grew among the thousands and thousands of people swarming the airport, simply trying to escape the new Taliban regime. Let's discuss this and more with the former Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson. He also served as the General Counsel over at the Department of Defense. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, the president, he's been trying all day today to convey calm, but the evacuations temporarily ground to a halt. Earlier today, people trying to escape have been beaten by the Taliban. They've been crushed in stampedes. Is the president doing enough to answer for this disaster?
Wolf, I was listening to the prior discussion. I'm not going to sit in judgment of people in the Situation Room in the Biden administration, many of whom I served with in the Obama administration. I remember what it's like 4 or 5 years ago to be in the hot seat, be in the midst of a crisis. It does seem, however, obvious that our government did not anticipate the situation in Kabul at the international airport and the mass exodus that would be attempted. Had we anticipated this, had we seen this coming, we would have, for example, left open Bagram Air Base, which is the point Governor Kasich made a moment ago. It's just about 60 kilometers away from Kabul. So, does our president appreciate the severity of this crisis? Yes, obviously. My concern is that it could get worse before it gets better. We may not have seen yet the worst of this crisis. I'm concerned that there will be, in the short term, factions within the Taliban government that arise, some moderate. The moderate faction right now seems to be the most overt publicly, but there's probably a more militant faction of the Taliban right now that may stir up trouble. But in the U.S., I think we need to prepare for a full-blown refugee crisis stemming from Afghanistan and do all that is necessary to give Americans, most certainly, and those that helped our efforts, safe passage out of Afghanistan.
We're showing our viewers some video of these Taliban fighters with U.S. weapons. They've captured a ton of U.S. weapons, some of them very, very sophisticated tanks, armored personnel carriers, Humvees, helicopters. It's a very, we're going to have more on this coming up in a little while. But Mr. Secretary, the President argued today that the United States no longer has any national security interest in Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda gone. But do you accept that argument that the U.S. can just wash its hands after 20 years? And there's enormous fear, a homeland security issue, that Al-Qaeda potentially and ISIS in Afghanistan under the Taliban will be coming back.
Well, Wolf, I'm not sure the President believes there's no national security interest in Afghanistan. I believe there is a national security interest for us in what happens to Afghanistan. First, Afghanistan is a very remote, rough terrain. Most of Afghanistan is ungoverned space in the mountains. You could probably hide an entire American city in the mountains of Afghanistan. It is the type of terrain where terrorist organizations seek to train, to headquarter, to establish a caliphate. That's true of Afghanistan, it's true of the Horn of Africa, it's true of Yemen, it's true of Syria and parts of Iraq. So we need to be concerned that another terrorist organization could crop up in Afghanistan like it did 20, 25 years ago. On the other hand, governments, even governments of the ilk of the Taliban, are not incapable of thinking rationally. The Taliban should realize that it's not in their own selfish interest to see another terrorist organization crop up within their midst. That happened 20 years ago. It didn't end so well for the Taliban 20 years ago. So it's in their interest to make sure that that Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State does not crop up. But we need to be vigilant. From a homeland security perspective, we need to be vigilant. The President today talked about the over-the-horizon capability. What he means by that is the ability to monitor whether a terrorist organization is propping up in Afghanistan from outside the borders of Afghanistan. We do have that capability. And so we need to be vigilant in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world. But let's not forget, Wolf, that right now, the number one terrorist threat to our homeland is what DHS talked about just the other day in a bulletin, which is homegrown, homeborn, white nationalist violent extremism. That is the number one terrorist threat to our homeland, and I hope our government does not take its eye off that ball right now.
I'm sure they are not taking their eye off that ball. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Jay Johnson, the former Homeland Security Secretary. Coming up, the Taliban seizes a war chest of American weapons left behind by withdrawing U.S. forces. Among the many disturbing images coming out of Afghanistan tonight, Taliban fighters parading U.S. weaponry left behind by withdrawing American forces. CNN's Brian Todd is on the story.
Row upon row of sophisticated assault rifles, boxes of pistols, ammunition, vision equipment. Videos posted by the Taliban online in recent days boast of what they say are their seizures of the assault rifles in the Afghan city of Herat. And at Kunduz airport, armored Humvees by the dozen. Some mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles called MRAPs costing $500,000 apiece. Even a small drone. These are the potentially lethal spoils the Taliban are believed to have captured in recent days from defeated Afghan forces. Weapons made in America, supplied by the U.S. to their fallen Afghan allies.
This is so bad that we will now not be able to tell the difference between a terrorist formation convoy and a U.S. convoy in Afghanistan, because they will look the same.
This video shows Taliban fighters proudly parading through the city of Kalat in white tunics, brandishing American-made M4 assault rifles and ballistic vests. With al-Qaeda poised to build back its strength with the Taliban takeover, experts tell us some sophisticated American weapons will almost inevitably fall into terrorist hands.
The weapons that concern me the most right now are those heavy machine guns and sniper rifles that they can use to sit around the airfield, pick off U.S. positions.
U.S. military officials say they've been able to get some weapons out of Afghanistan before the Taliban's recent blitz through the country. But according to various media reports, the Taliban are believed to control many U.S.-made armored vehicles and aircraft, potentially including Black Hawk helicopters and Scout attack helicopters.
And another feature that also reminds me of that episode is, you know, the Taliban
Got
just
to have
released
the
a bunch
Zen
of
pouch
prisoners from
bits.
Bagram Air Base, which was the main American base. That air base was full of Taliban leaders and members of Al-Qaeda. So it's not just the weaponry, it's also releasing these prisoners. This is also what ISIS did when it stormed across Iraq and Syria. So this movie is playing out very similar to what we saw in summer 2014 with ISIS.
Well, do you think you're an expert on Al-Qaeda?
Yeah.
Specifically Al-Qaeda. Is Al-Qaeda now poised to make a comeback inside Afghanistan? And if it does, what kind of threat would that pose to the U.S.?
Well, the answer is, of course, and threat to the U.S., that's a different question. But General Austin, the Secretary of Defense, was asked in June directly about this question. He said it would take, if the government of Afghanistan fell, it would take a year or two for Al-Qaeda to reconstitute in Afghanistan and maybe pose a threat to the homeland. He has since revised that and said, in the light of the Taliban takeover now, we need to reassess that assessment. So,
it could be a few months.
It could be a lot quicker. But I mean, I want to be careful. I mean, for Al-Qaeda to conduct an attack in the United States is still very hard. Our defensive capabilities are much different than they were on 9/11. And our offensive capabilities. But that said, you know, can they conduct attacks on American targets in the region?
The race car right here.
American targets.
Dude.